Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of PHPod. I'm your host, Jack Mellom, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking to one of my former professors, Dr. Andy Pulte, and we'll be talking about plants, people, and public health.
Okay. All right, who are you? Who am I talking to right now?
This is Andy Pulte from the University of Tennessee in the Department of Plant Sciences, Jack's former department, and we work together quite closely in class and other things, and so I'm really glad to be here today.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. I think started off with my degree was in public horticulture, and I think everybody has their own sort of definition of it. And I think it's a fun thing to talk about because now that we're talking in public health, there's obviously a lot of relation. I wouldn't have you on the podcast if that wasn't the case. But for me, public horticulture has always been the ways that we can use plants in our environment to influence people in positive ways. But I always think it's a symbiotic relationship and how we can use the plants to benefit us as much as they, vice versa. So what's your definition? How do you tell students, kind of explain to them, or somebody who knows nothing about horticulture, how do you, tell them what it is?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It is kind of an interesting discipline, and there's not a lot of universities that have this subcategory. There's been more over the last several years, but here at the University of Tennessee, we were kind of glad to, in a way, kind of lead the way in bringing this idea of people and plants together, right? And so at its very core, what's public horticulture? Well, it's people and plants. It's the intersection of people and plants. It's the providing of a forum for the dissemination of information about plants, and that can be educating people about plants. It can be helping people through therapy with plants. And so there's a variety of ways that we use plants in our everyday life to impact us.
Awesome. Thank you. And you talk about the dissemination, and I feel like it's really important to talk about Plant Sleuth because that is kind of the start of my, I guess, content creation days. And for those who aren't familiar, who hopefully after this podcast become familiar with Plant Sleuth, it is Dr. Pulte's Instagram account / kind of version of showcasing the class, what we talk about, our landscapes, and I'll let you go into more detail. I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but why do you think it is so important to add on that kind of component for plants instead of just putting a module on, Canvas or Blackboard or whatever, learning
Right.
website people have?
Well, Jack, and so for other people, my job is 100% teaching. I teach people about plants in a variety of different ways. I teach classes specifically on public horticulture, on people-plant interactions and why plants in our everyday life are important. And Jack, I took some of those classes, but I also teach plant identification. Like, how do you know the plants that are around you? And right, a lot of times, like, I try to think about this a little bit. Like, the beginning of knowledge, a lot of times, is just knowing what to call things. Like, to call things by their true and correct name is very important when we start to bring forth definitions and how we operate in the world. And so, really, starting in COVID, when I was forced to put university classes online, we started a YouTube channel first and then an Instagram account. They're both called Plant Sleuth. Really, encouraging people to learn primarily about plants. And Jack, you knew this from our class, and you did such a great job. And I'll tell you that, everybody who's listening, Jack took it to the next level, right? It took it one step up, where we had more content to help connect people to plants in a variety of different ways. And people learn in different ways. And so we provide, we do it in class, but then we also have YouTube videos that are about the plants that we are learning. We have fun ways to help people remember plants. And Jack, I remember you did a lot of cool, kind of quick, day in the life type plant walk things that you helped us with our Instagram account back in the day. And so that's all different ways to help people connect with plants. And so, that's led, just putting some of our course content online has led now to about 2.5 million different views of people looking at plants, things about plants online. North of like 60,000 hours of content being viewed by people just on our YouTube channel. That doesn't account what people do. So check out Plant Sleuth, and If you want to learn plants and you're inspired to learn plants, that just might be a good gateway for you to start that process.
What I learned probably the most from that is how, when you're talking about a topic that, might be familiar, people are familiar with on a surface level, like plants, like people know what a plant is, but don't go in depth with it. And I feel like that's kind of similar with public health is, it, makes sense, public health, but to teach it to people who don't know, it's super important to find the nuanced ways and find fun with it. I think it's, going on plant walks and doing the landscape identification wouldn't really be fun if we didn't, joke about it. Like I always remember, I think it's called oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the one plant you always say is only looks good 2 weeks of the year. I
Right.
I always remember that, and I'll put like an overlay when we're doing this podcast so people know what I'm talking about. But I think it's a Japanese something.
Well,
But
I know that we always talk about like there's this plant, it's a very popular plant. It's called quince, and
that's
I think it's like this plant looks abysmal 51 weeks out of the year. I mean, you get one kind of excited thing and just, and we try to do that through our content, give people a little or like, a rhyme that helps you remember the name of a plant, some pop culture stuff that helps kind of like, oh, maybe I'm interested in looking at that. And sometimes you have to be in education, you have to be sneaky, right? Like, they're learning things, but they don't necessarily, view it as like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a class right now.
yeah. And I guess kind of going with the landscape tips and that in the health kind of transition here, how is it that a landscape can influence somebody's health? Like the types of trees they plant, the types of flowers, the dates they bloom. How does that influence somebody's not only health but also just, I don't know, their experience within a garden or a park? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Jack, one of my favorite things to say, and I say this many times in a year, is that you're going to see more plants than any other organism in your entire life. And what they impact you mentally, physically, spiritually. There's so many ways that plants around you impact you. Uh, you know, you eat plants, and that impacts your physical health. The plants that are around you impacts your environment. The plants that are around you impact your mental and physical health. And so, that's what we dive into just a little bit more. And so, specifically about the landscapes that we interact with, how does that impact our everyday life? Well, there's probably north of 40 like really high quality studies that all point to, I'll start with this, just seeing nature benefits us, helps the cortisol levels of it go down, stress reduction. There's a great study out of the Snake River prison in Oregon of inmates that are in solitary confinement, and all they get to do is see views of nature, like videos of nature on their cell walls, and they see reduction in violent crimes or violent incidences within that prison. We know that just views of nature out of a hospital window uh, end up patients spend less time in the hospital. We know that through the medical doctors how they do measure the reduction of stress just by through there's got VR goggle studies where people are just viewing nature through VR goggles, seeing just pictures of nature, reducing stress. And so if just seeing pictures of nature and the outside world reduce your stress levels, reduce, impacts of things that are going on in your life, how much more would actually being in that natural environment help you, right? And so the benefits go up and up and up and up as you level up, like a video game. If you level up your experiences in nature, you're going to see more and more benefits. So, how do the landscape around your college impact you? Uh, high quality landscapes, they impact us. They bring our stress levels down. But those plants that are in those landscape are also functional, right? They provide for pollinators. They filter our water. They do a variety of good things. And so there's many benefits to high quality landscapes. And I'll ask you this about your experience here on this campus is, there's some college campuses where you go inside of a building and you spend your whole day inside of this building. And so you come from a very hilly college campus, right? In fact, one of our areas on the University of Tennessee campus is called The Hill, right? But I'm interested to ask you, Jack, like that experience of having to move from building to building in the outdoor built environment. I mean, was that a benefit for you, like reflecting back on that?
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, and I don't even know if I ever told you kind of how I got into plant sciences, but I was originally in engineering and it just wasn't for me. I think sometime my sophomore year, I recognized that and I was really stressed out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So every night I would just go on a walk around campus. And I remember how much I loved the walks and loved seeing the plants. But at that point in my life, the only plant I could name was probably a tulip, and I don't even know if I could name a tulip still. And I couldn't really figure out what it was I was enjoying. And during that, it was like, okay, let me look up majors I might like. And I part of why I love plant sciences so much is because it was all fresh to me. Like I knew why I liked it, but I didn't know anything, the bones of it.
Right.
And being in a major where you're just consistently learning literally every single day, even the beginner stuff is super enjoyable. But yeah, that experience was awesome. And Boston's a really cool city to be in now because there's so many examples that we have the Arbor Way or the corridor. It's in between two neighborhoods, the south end, and it's just got labeled as an arboretum because they have enough trees now. And it's one of my favorite things. It's right by our medical campus, just to walk through. It's maybe, I don't know, a half mile. It's really small. And then you obviously have the Boston Common and Boston Garden, and then Arnold Arboretum, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I guess my question, kind of compounding off that, is how do people, especially here in Boston, when it gets winter and a lot of the plants in or the public garden in Boston, they're not evergreens. There's a lot of plants that once it hits winter, it isn't really the most enjoyable place to be. It's not the same in Arnold Arboretum, but there it kind of gets dreary. How do you still like kind of experience plants to the best capacity when it gets really cold and dreary out, and I don't utilize those benefits? Do you have any insight or recommendations for houseplants, anything like that?
Well, yeah, I love what you said about houseplants. And so for sure, like we can bring plants indoors, right? And so and that's a big thing right now uh, is living. There's an old book I have on my shelf called Living with Fancy Plants. It's like, this idea of living with plants around us, these different plants around us, they do have a benefit. I'll give you a this is kind of interesting for as an educator is there's a study that was done where they basically it was like an English professor who taught the same class every like 4 times a day, right? And during the during every other class, they moved a bunch of plants in the classroom. And then for the next class, they took the plants out of the classroom and they repeated this throughout the semester. And at the end of the semester, the professor, the students who were in the plant classroom had better grades and also gave their professor better evaluations at the end of the semester. And so, that's just one little example. But we know that plants in the inside environment, beyond the health benefits of having these oxygen producing and air filtering things in our house, they can also just benefit our mental health by seeing green things. But but what you talked about too is a little bit, you need to have a little bit of a perspective shift. And I say this to myself is, Andy, can you appreciate the aesthetics of decay? Is one thing that I say to myself sometimes. I look around at the world and even in the sleepy times of our landscape. In the city of Boston, you walk the Emerald Necklace in Boston, and there's great stream system through that. There's great public lands in the city of Boston where, yeah, the plants are sleepy, right? But there's still aesthetics there. There's still things to enjoy. There's still things to look at. And so can I practice my the art of observation in those landscapes? Can I slow down? Really, that winter landscape invites us to slow down. It invites us to appreciate the aesthetics of decay. And, I think we all can use a little bit more of that. Hey, let me stop and pay attention. And so, that's what I would say about, that slower time where maybe you as a new student in plants, you think, well, plants only grow in the summer, right? And we only think about plants in the summertime, but no, there's things going on, especially here in the southeastern United States, even more so than maybe there, but there's always things going on.
Awesome. Uh, Thank you. That's a really good perspective. And I think that there is, I've always said this, and I know it's probably been said many times before, but I think it's a great tree if it looks just as good when it doesn't have its leaves. I think that's kind of the sign of, a well placed tree and everything. And I can think of, I don't know, there's a bunch. I mean, a proper, maple in the right spot where the second it loses its leaves, it still has that shape and form. It's a great look. Okay, then, well, we already kind of went into it, but my meta-analysis, which still it's fun to see that I wrote a meta-analysis now, and I wrote one last semester for class, and I would like to say I've improved a lot. But in it,
Always on an upward trajectory. I like that.
in it, I wrote about the influence of horticulture on human health. That was kind of the topic, and I uh, compartmentalize it to, or I think that's the right word there, to the 8 dimensions of wellness. So, like you said, financial, environmental, social, occupational, and I know we've talked a little bit about some of them, but is there any in particular that you think that plants influence in our health that just never gets talked about or gets discussed enough? I think some of them are already pretty underrated, but is there one that's just like, man, this is really benefiting you and most people don't have any idea?
Well, I mean, it's going to depend on the person. And so someone who has never really thought about interacting with their natural world, it's going to be different than someone who's already kind of okay, like they're already there, right? And so I feel like the the top of the food chain for interacting with is actually interacting. Maybe you're gardening, maybe your hands are in soil, and a person who's doing that at the end of the chain, who's actually interacting with plants. They're planting plants. They're in the soil. They're digging in the soil. Is going to get the maximum benefit. They're going to get physical benefits. This it's also exercise, right? The mental benefits as well. We've got studies that suggest that when people garden, the brain waves that are going on are very similar to what you see when people meditate. And so there's stress reduction, there's physical benefits, and also, there's the benefits that, sometimes we eat what we grow, right? And so there's benefits to that. But way on the other side of the spectrum, somebody who lives in a stark urban environment, maybe they spend their day in an office building, no plants, no view of nature. We find that it doesn't take very much. Like just very little time in nature can bring benefits on a different, and maybe it's just stress. Maybe I reduce my stress by X%, right? I mean, we don't know. Like it's different for everybody, but I don't want to throw out a percentage, but maybe just a little bit. Like at the and then you get some benefit from that. And so something that you maybe up it. Maybe you visit in Boston the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, and you're there for the art, but you notice it's got a beautiful courtyard as well, and you kind of start to appreciate some of those plants. Maybe you notice one plant and you get curious about that plant. That's got mental benefits as well, just being curious about things. And so, I think people can level up in the benefit, right? But it takes very little. I want, somebody who's listening to this that's like, I never really went to a national park. Is that what I have to do? No, you have to find a space in your life where you can get exposed to the natural world in some way. And I'm going to tell you that just a little bit is going to give you some benefit. I'm not asking people to be like heavy, Olympic bodybuilders in the natural world. I mean, I need you to be like thumb wrestlers, like at the very beginning, right? And I think that you're going to want to level up as you go.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's a great message. And I think this reminds me of one of our assignments, and I would love for you to talk a little more about it. It's probably my favorite assignment I ever did. It's when you made us in class teach how to, or give somebody a plant and teach them how to take care of it. Somebody from the ages, I think you said 5 to 8, or somebody young kid. And I did it with my boss's son. And so I went there, I brought him a little thing of cat grass. And for those unfamiliar, it's very easy to grow and it just sprouts up and it's fun to watch. And so I gave him cat grass and whatever, my boss would send me videos of him walking to go water it like every week, and he just fell in love with it. And then a couple weeks later, I actually got one of the plants I propagated and I gave it to him, and he loved that plant too. And then when I moved out of Knoxville, I gave him my plants. And to this day, for the last year, and with monthly check-ins, he's always asking about the plants, and he's now super in tune. They have like 30 plants in their house, and before they only had a few. And I think that experience for me was super rewarding because I got to see somebody fall in love with plants. And I know we talked about in class, there's studies to show that it is a formative experience if some a child's taught plants at a young age, it just sticks with them. And I kind of want to ask you if you want to expound upon that, but also if you want to talk about ways in which early education and early plant education is so beneficial, and kind of ways that maybe people can get involved in volunteering
Right.
to do that as well.
Yeah, I love to tell people that if you have got little hands in your life, that it is critically important that you introduce them to the natural world. And we've actually done some studies here at the University of Tennessee that really suggest that if you're going to end up in a career in the natural sciences, now that could be, it doesn't mean that it have to be plants. It could be geology. Uh, if you uh, if you're going to end up in a career in the natural sciences, and we need people to be in careers in the natural science, in the natural sciences. We need people who are interested in the environment. We need people who are interested in preserving our world and nature and all the good things that go along with that. In every level, we need people who are interested in that. That typically those people who end up in careers in the natural sciences have some sort of experience before the age of 9 that lead them into at least considering a career in the natural sciences. And that could be visiting a national park with a grandparent. It could be growing a plant with their friend Jack, right? And somehow they're introduced to the natural world. And when people are about 9 years old, they get a little bit older. What are their influences really shift from their parents, their caregivers to their peers, right? And so we really find that that is a critical time. That's why, at our State Botanic Garden of Tennessee and so many public gardens throughout the world have this big focus on early education for in the world of gardening and the natural world, where, insects aren't icky, they're an important part of our ecosystem, where you can gain confidence in growing plant. And so I would like interject that yes, you grew a plant with that young person, Jack, but you also maybe gave them the confidence that they could grow plants, right? And so early successes also oftentimes lead to people wanting to do more or being interested in doing more, right? And then, I mean, I encounter people in students in plant sciences who've never used a shovel before. It's like, you never use a shovel? It's like, no. I mean, I grew up in the middle of the city. It's like, when the heck would I use a shovel, right? Well, okay, let me show you how to use a shovel. Okay. And so just that confidence builder, or that connection that they made with their grandparent, picking a tomato in a garden, or the bond that they created by visiting a national park and learning about the natural world on a family vacation with their parents. And this I think this is important for what your group does is, in the early 2000s, we actually saw like our visitation to our national parks uh, was the age was actually too old, right? We saw that like the majority of visitors were, 45 plus, 55 plus. And we actually, it's from 2010 on, we're actually seeing a reversal of that, where we're actually seeing more and more younger visitors to our wild places that we have in North America. I mean, which is awesome. Maybe that's, the Instagram effect of, people showing pictures of like, man, this is like, a beautiful place to get a picture of you like with your hand under your chin or whatever. Uh, but we're seeing a reversal on that, and I think that people in public health are poised to take advantage of that, to see how our natural world can actually impacts how we live in our cities, how we experience the natural world, how we can make our lives better every day by just injecting a little bit of nature into that.
Yeah, I made a video on that earlier in the year when I talked about Arnold Arboretum, this gives a good point to talk about that some more. But just how the impact of a park, and just a beautiful one at that, is for our landscapes, our environments, or our cities, really. I mean, just in Knoxville, again, we talk about the campus, but in Knoxville, Tennessee, there's like so many parks to go to and so many places. I love Sequoia Park. I would go there pretty much every week. And here, Arnold Arboretum, um, I'll let you talk about what makes it so great. I'm correct on it's the first botanical garden or first arboretum in the United States, right?
Well, I mean, it certainly is the precursor to what we have now. And so it wasn't, you got this thing in Boston called the Arnold Arboretum, and an arboretum is a botanic garden, but it focuses on woody trees and shrubs, and that's certainly what you see there. But I mean, that thing is open what sunrise? I don't know for sure, but sunrise to sunset every day of the year, and it's open to the public. The gates are open. You can walk in there and you can learn. It's actually set out. It's actually arranged in something they call the Linnaean system, where you can actually go there and study. Like, you want to see every maple that grows in Boston. Like, here is every maple that grows in Boston, and they're all together, right? Not every garden is like that. You visit other gardens, and everything's maybe all mixed up. But the Arnold Arboretum is primarily set out in this Linnaean system. I was an intern there uh, back in the day, and really enjoyed being a part of that. But even when we talk about it in class, it's a great place to go and just walk and see plants. And even if you're not looking at the signs, the plants, and learning how to identify them, just having a public place uh, in Jamaica Plain there to visit plants, right? And to be outside and see the outdoors, I think is a great benefit to that city. And also, it's a historic place. But you start to get a little bit curious about that place. Uh, it was a home to some great plants people throughout history. There's a guy named John Singer Sargent. Uh, and the idea when the Arnold Arboretum started, this is very interesting. We just talk about this in class. And the language that they use is that they went to other places and they discovered plants. Like, can you go to China? It's the 1800s. Can you go to China and discover a plant, that's, around, that's been known by everybody who lives there, but yet they come back to the United States and they put their name on it and they say, we discovered this plant, right? And so even so, there's implications to that language and how it's passed on. And so it's not just about the experience of plants, but you start to dig deeper. We start thinking about culture. We start thinking about like how the people from where that plant came from use that plant. How did that impact their culture, right? How does the culture of having that open space where you can go and experience nature, how does it impact the culture of that area of Boston and Jamaica Plain? And so, I mean, you can, at skin deep, you can look at some of these things and just say, oh, it's a nice place, but there's so much more to it, right? But also there's scientific discovery, right? If you go near the, what is it called? The Honeywell Administration Building. Right in front of that is one of the first dawn redwoods, metasequoias, that were ever in this country, right? The Arnold Arboretum basically saved that species from extinction, right? And that's sitting there in front of that building, and you drive right by it, right? And so there's great scientific discoveries there. There's the preservation of species there that would not be on this planet if it weren't for that place. There are people that are finding out how to grow plants better and preserve them, because there's so much that we don't know. How much is interlinked in with these species, and how much do we not know that we could learn in the future by the preservation of that species now?
Yeah, that's a amazing point. I feel like in public health, it's kind of like that too, where at least in the city of Boston, there is so much history to what like public health is founded upon. Um, um, and sometimes I think we forget that there is history that we, have been able to, fun to look back on and also learn from and grow from. And it's something that always brings hope to the future, because I think, at least like when the Don Redwood was almost on extinction, there was a point of hope where it was able to be saved. And, consequentially, Arnold Arboretum is what it is now. And, public health, like at the most of times when you think of public health, you think of viruses, you think of COVID, and because of COVID, obviously there's terrible, but during that there is learning experiences, and it was able to be overcome for the most part, and then also was part of a catalyst for houseplants. It's made people fall in love with plants. And so there's sometimes benefits in those, not sometimes, there's always little silver linings in those dreary times that I think it's really important to notice. But well, that's it for all my questions. Do you have any other final things you want to hammer around, or points you want to hammer, or
But
any?
I want to tell this story. So we've got a park in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's called Lakeshore Park. And that park was actually a state-run mental institution for many, many years. And if you go to across the street, there's a cemetery, and on the top of the hill of that cemetery, there are graves of the people who were at that place, and not all of them, but there are a couple graves up there that have this language that I'd never heard before, and it would say that so and so was born this year, like 18 whatever. Then there was this middle one where it said they were carried in like 1901. And then there was another date that said died 1928. So they were born this date, they were carried this date, and they died this date. And I got curious. They say, what is this that they were carried, right? And so the idea was that when their family brought them to that place, that was their first death. And then they also denote this second death that happened. And so that was the history of this place. It wasn't a great place. There was this big, long history of, this is where, when, if things were not going right, you got sent to this place, right? And that was a long history in Knoxville. And then, I was just so refreshed during COVID. In that time, we saw that public park, that public space, flip the script on history, and it became this new mental health institution where people were going there for their own mental health. They could go outside, they could be outside, and it became one of the most positive places in Knoxville. In fact, they have over 1 million visitors a year there. And why are people going there? They're going there for their own health, well-being, and mental health. And so the script has been completely flipped on that. And we're seeing that all over the nation, where people are realizing that these public places that, yes, they have plants, but they're out in the natural world, are the great places where we can now go for our own mental health and our well-being. And guess what? Most of them, if not, so many of them are free to go and visit, right? You can go to Boston Commons and you can walk around for free, right? It's one of the great ideas of this American experience, to have these free places where you can go and you can be outside. And so go outside, enjoy plants. If you've got little hands in your life, please get them involved in the natural world, because your world needs them to do that, and become an advocate for that in your own life. And Jack, I so appreciate you having me on here, and you now being an advocate for some of those same ideas.